So here is the diagram that we made in order to sort of pair each part of the car with different parts of the government. So first we have the frame as the Constitution. I didn't draw an arrow for that because it's like the whole outside of the car. We have the engine as Congress. The driver is the president. Passengers are voters. The turn signal is the media. The fuel is the citizens. The gas pedal is the elections. The brakes are the courts. The transmission is the money. And then the tires are the states. And so now we're going to go into each of our own little interviews explaining how these analogies all work. So I said the engine was like Congress, and the reason for that is because in the car, the engine is responsible for using fuel in order to move the car. The car is incapable of moving in any direction without the engine that gets it moving, just like our country wouldn't be able to make any progress without the actions of the Congress. In order for our law and culture to move forward, we have to rely on Congress to write out the laws that will set the country in motion. New laws in a country are what give it direction, and Congress is the group of people that decide if our laws need to move our country or not, just like the engine does for a car. Because Congress is responsible for writing the laws, they are the ones responsible for getting the country going. For example, when the country was legally unfair to those based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted by the 88th U.S. Congress, which was the engine our country needed to move towards equality. It's possible to argue that the president is the engine because he can sign bills into laws. The president has the power to put laws into action, which would be what gets the U.S. car to move. However, this is refuted simply by the fact that the president does not have the power of making such laws that get our country to move, while the engine has the power to make the car move. Because of this, Congress would be the superior analogy for the engine. I also said the tires were the states because the tires of a car is what allows the car to actually move. Even if you have all of the fuel you need, a car with no wheels would be incapable of moving anywhere. Even if Congress tries their hardest to make the best amendments and laws anybody's ever heard of, it's not going to go anywhere without the state's approval and law enforcement in order to make sure that the country actually moves forward. The federal government agrees with the states on what to do so that they can move in that direction, just like how a car tells the wheels where to go so the car can go in that direction. The 10th Amendment justifies this claim as it says, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. The states may have small individual freedoms to choose how to live, but the direction in which they all go is clearly outlined by the U.S. as a whole in its Constitution." It can be argued that the tires are a bad analogy for the states because states do technically have some freedom outside of the Constitution because different states have different cultures they operate in. What defeats this idea is the fact that tires also have different designs dependent on what environment they work in. Even though some tires are better for off-road or highways, they still have to move in the direction the car commands. Even though some states have different politics and economic structures, they still have to move in the direction the U.S. and its Constitution outlines.
I chose the driver to be the president, for in a car, the driver is in charge of controlling the vehicle. I chose the president, for we believe the president oversees the country, like how the driver oversees the function of the car. The driver is also responsible for any damage to the car and the people in the car, like how the president is responsible for the country and all the people who live in it. A misjudgment from the driver can cause a serious accident. Similarly, a misjudgment by the president can cause a severe problem for the country. For example, Herbert Hoover is the president that is blamed for bringing the U.S. into the Great Depression. As president, you have a responsibility for the country, and he didn't retain this responsibility. This type of crash affected the entire country, like how a crash affects the entire car and everyone in it. It could be said that the president could instead be the engine of the car. If the engine of the car is faulty and non-reliable, it could break down in the middle of the road. This could result in a panic, for you are now stranded in the middle of nowhere and must wait until help comes. The main thing that disproves this idea is that the government is controlled by the president because he controls the country, but still has restrictions he must follow like a driver following road rules. The driver of a car can be changed much easier than the engine as well, and the engine can last quite a long time before needing replacing. In a car, the turn signal tells other drivers the car's intention. We chose the media as the turn signal for what I believe the media tells information and can persuade people to believe them that all of it is true. The turn signal can tell other drivers what the intention is, but sometimes they either don't go through with the intention or do it without even signaling in the first place. For example, CNN and Fox News are very popular news stations and are known to be very biased toward their viewpoint. They can tell people what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. This can also be demonstrated in the turn signal, for as I stated earlier, sometimes the driver doesn't mean to have the turn signal on, so they're telling the driver the wrong information. This can end up leading to a problem, much like how biased media can cause a problem. It could be said that the media could instead be the gas pedal for it drives voters' opinions and ideologies. The more biased media someone watches, the more they're going to support those ideologies. Then this plays into elections and is what gives Republicans and Democrats so many votes. The main thing that disproves this idea is that the media can only try and persuade the voters and tell them people's intentions, much like how a turn signal tells the other drivers the car's intentions. A turn signal can be accidental and put out the wrong message, much like how the media can change certain topics to better fit them, even if resulting in putting out the wrong message.
The energy of a car comes from the fuel. This is the substance that makes everything run. It is where the motion of the car starts. For a political system, that same fuel is the citizens. It all starts with them, and they are the ones at the end of the day who are affected most by the government, and therefore they are at the forefront pushing and expressing what kinds of needs they have and how the government can help them to fulfill said needs. Our citizens include everyone. No matter if you hold place in office, or construction, or a student, you are all citizens with needs and wants. These expressions are what push our government to try to accomplish so much. For example, if a car has no fuel, it will not go anywhere. Similarly, if a country has no citizens, there are no people whose needs have to be met. While the citizens could be the passenger because they voice their opinions, but ultimately they are at the sideline of what the driver and the car do. This does not work because without a passenger, the car can still function. With no gas in your car, however, you are not going to be able to go anywhere at all. The backbone of the car is the frame. The rest of the car parts are built onto that frame. It serves as the structure of the car, and without a strong and well-established frame, the car would only break down and all the other pieces couldn't function without it. The backbone of our nation is the Constitution. It was established when our country was founded, and without a strong backbone such as the Constitution, the United States would have failed long ago. The Constitution is able to be amended and created strong fundamental laws and basic rights for our citizens. For example, if a car is built with a bad frame and gets in a collision, then the whole car might have to be scrapped. If it does have a strong frame, then the car can be repaired and built back up, and even improved upon. This parallels the Constitution because, even with its flaws, its base structure makes it easy to repair and able to be built upon. The Constitution could be the tires because it is part of the foundation and keeps the country moving, except the tires on the car come to a halt when the car isn't moving. The Constitution is steadfast and always present, making it impossible for it to ever come to a stop.
The brakes of our utopian government would be the courts. While brakes of a car have control over the speed of the car, courts control the speed of our utopian government. Through checks and balances, the courts put a stop to certain goals the government pursues. The court utilizes their ability of judicial review to review administrative power in order to stop certain ideas and ensure that other branches do not have too much power. The gas pedal of a car adds more power to the vehicle in order to cause its speed to accelerate. The brakes have the complete opposite responsibility. They remove power from the car in order to slow it down or stop it completely. This is very similar to how judicial review of the courts is an aspect of checks and balances that remove power from the other branches of government in order to stop them from having too much. One example of this is how, in the case of Roe v. Wade in 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that states were unable to make laws that prohibited abortion because they were unconstitutional. While this decision may possibly be overturned, the original case is an excellent example of judicial review. The choice by the Supreme Court took away power from the states because they were no longer allowed to make laws prohibiting abortion. This was done so by the court system reviewing laws and deciding whether they were constitutional or not. Others may argue that the brakes of the government would be Congress. This is because Congress can remove money from other areas of the government in order to stop or delay their action. However, this does not take into account the ability of Congress to give money as well. This would speed up the action of the government, similar to a gas pedal and not a brake. Because the brakes of a car are never able to speed up the car, Congress should not be the brakes. The transmission of our utopian government would be money. The transmission of a car utilizes the power created by the engine to spin the wheels of the car. It can use this power to speed up the car or remove power in order to slow down the car. As a transmission, money can both slow down and speed up the government. When Congress adds money to certain areas of the government, this allows the speed of the government to increase. When Congress removes funding from certain areas of government, the speed of the government then decreases. An example of this is how Congress added money to COVID relief when the pandemic originally started. This allowed research on vaccines and different areas of relief to occur at a much quicker speed. However, Congress is now removing funding from COVID relief in order for this money to go towards aid for Ukraine. This demonstrates how Congress currently views aid for Ukraine as more important than COVID relief. Therefore, the money switches from providing power to COVID relief and instead begins powering aid for Ukraine. In our utopian government, money powers different areas of the government and decides what to prioritize. However, others may argue that the transmission of the car would be Congress. Congress is the entity that is moving the money around. However, it is the money itself that is slowing or speeding up the government.
In a car, a passenger determines where they want the car to go, but also to make sure the driver is driving safely. A passenger functions as a compass to the driver and the cars. This is similar to how voters determine the direction they want the country to go by voting in certain politicians, while also keeping the politicians in check with approval ratings and forming committees. If they are unhappy with the direction they are taking, they are replaced with other politicians. This is like how a driver might be replaced with a new driver if the passenger feels like the driver is not meeting their expectations, like if they're driving too fast, slow, or bad, or just tired. For example, in the 2020 election, voters chose to vote out the former President Donald Trump for President Biden. Voters were not satisfied with the former president's direction he was taking the country, so they voted him out. This is like how a passenger in a car might vote or decide to change the driver because they are not satisfied with their driving. It would be said that voters are the driver of the car, that the voters control the country like how a driver controls a car. This does not make sense because voters do not directly control the country, but instead guide the country the direction they want it to go through voting. Like how a passenger can backseat drive or tell the driver where they want to go, but still not control the car itself. In a car, the gas pedal controls the speed of the car. Without the gas pedal, the car would not be able to speed up and eventually come to a stop. With the car not being able to move, the passengers and the driver would not be able to get to their destination. This is like what would happen to our country without elections. Elections allow voters to determine the developing speed of the country by voting in certain politicians into power, much like how a gas pedal determines the speed of the car. Without elections, the voters and the politicians would lose their control over the country and resulting the country to eventually come to a stop. This is similar to how the driver and passenger would lose control of their car without a gas pedal. For example, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the law that outlawed discrimination in the voting process, allowed more people to vote and caused the expansion in elections. This law is like replacing an old broken gas pedal. The old gas pedal was limiting the speed of the car like how voting discrimination was limiting the U.S.'s development. But the new gas pedal allows the car to run more efficiently, like how the Voting Rights Act of 1965 made voting discrimination legal, causing the voting process to run more efficiently, resulting in the country also running more efficiently. It could be said that elections could be the engine of the car, that elections determine the power of the country like how an engine determines the power of the car. This does not work because elections do not determine the power of the car, but instead Congress does. Elections determine how much the voters want Congress to put toward the country's development, like how a gas pedal determines the power taken from the engine of a car to put toward the car's speed.
Cars are very complicated. If one part breaks down, the whole car can't work properly. This is just like our government. We have to make sure that we are doing our best to vote in a way that helps our government work together to do the best that our country can. Even though it's very complicated, we have to make sure that every single part of the government is working so that our country can function in the way that it should.